His engagement was cancelled and he randomly married a stranger, unaware he was a gay mafia boss. The grand ballroom of the St. Regis Hotel shimmered under the golden glow of chandeliers. The air was thick with the scent of lilies, champagne, and the quiet murmur of high society chatter. Everything was perfect, exactly as Julian had imagined his engagement party to be. He stood near the center of the room, his hands lightly clutching a glass of sparkling wine, his heart beating a little faster in excitement. Tonight, in front of everyone, he and Marcus would finally announce their engagement. His fiancée was running late, but that wasn't unusual. Marcus was a busy man, a rising star in the corporate world, ambitious and sharp, but he always showed up for him. Always. He adjusted the crisp lapel on his white suit, stealing a glance at his parents, who were engaged in polite conversation with a group of influential guests. They had pushed for this engagement, ensuring that Marcus was the right match for their family's legacy. Julian sighed, taking another sip of champagne. Where is he? Then the doors to the ballroom swung open. All eyes turned, and in walked Marcus, not alone, but hand in hand with another man. Julian's heart stopped. Whispers rippled through the crowd. A waiter froze mid-pour, champagne spilling onto the tablecloth. Cameras from the invited press turned, capturing the scandal unfolding before them. Julian couldn't move. Ivan Petrov, the son of one of Marcus's most important business partners, was stunning, dressed in a sleek black suit that clung to him like a second skin. His lips curved into a smirk, and Marcus, he looked completely unbothered. He was still holding his hand. Julian forced himself to speak, his voice a whisper barely audible over the tension filling the room. Marcus, he stopped a few feet away from him, looked him dead in the eyes, and then, with chilling indifference, he spoke. Julian, I can't marry you. The words hit him like a physical blow. The entire room fell silent. Julian's breath hitched. What are you saying? Marcus exhaled as if this was nothing more than a slight inconvenience. Let's be honest here, Julian. You have nothing to offer me. Her stomach twisted. I don't understand. You proposed to me. Marcus's lips curled into something that wasn't quite a smile. Did I though? Or was it just a conversation our families arranged? His vision blurred. I needed the leverage of your family's name, he continued. But now I have better options. Ivan chuckled softly, squeezing Marcus's arm. He means me. Julian felt sick. This is a joke, right? He whispered, his voice breaking. Marcus's eyes hardened. I never loved you, Julian, he said, his voice sharp and cutting. You were just a stepping stone. And now I don't need you anymore. A sharp gasp broke through the room. Someone dropped a glass. Julian's hands trembled as he stared at him, trying to find anything, any sign that this wasn't real, that this wasn't happening. But Marcus just smirked. Ivan tilted his head, faux sympathy dripping from his voice. You're a sweet boy, Julian, but let's be real. You don't belong in Marcus's world. You never did. Julian's entire body went cold. 100 pairs of eyes were on him, watching, waiting to see how he would crumble. He could feel the whispers. Poor boy, so embarrassing. Did he really think he loved him? His father's voice cut through the suffocating silence. Julian turned slowly, hoping just this once that his father would defend him. But the look on his father's face wasn't one of concern. It was disgust. You have humiliated us, his father said, his voice low and sharp as a blade. Julian's mouth parted. I didn't. If you can't secure a husband with wealth and power, his father continued coldly, then you are no longer a son of mine. The final blow. Julian staggered back. His father turned away, leaving him alone in a room full of people. His entire world had just shattered. The streets of Manhattan were unforgiving at night, especially when you were walking alone in a white groom's suit that no longer felt like it belonged to you. Julian's dress shoes clicked against the pavement, the sound sharp, relentless, mocking. His feet ached, the expensive leather digging into his skin, but he didn't stop. He couldn't stop. Not when every time he closed his eyes, he could still hear Marcus's voice, cold, Final. I never loved you. His father's voice wasn't far behind, slicing through his already broken heart. You are no longer a son of mine. A shaky breath escaped his lips as he stumbled forward, the crisp night air burning his lungs. The diamond ring that had once sat proudly on his finger was gone, left abandoned on the marble floor of the ballroom. He had nothing now. No fiancé, no family, no future. He didn't know how long he wandered, but eventually, the warm glow of a small, dimly lit bar pulled him in. It wasn't the kind of place he normally would have set foot in, too old, too quiet, too unfamiliar. But right now, he didn't care. He just needed a drink. The bartender barely glanced at him as he slid onto the worn-out stool, his suit out of place against the peeling wood and flickering neon lights. "Whiskey," he muttered. "Neat." The bartender raised an eyebrow but said nothing, pouring him a glass before stepping away. Julian downed the first sip, wincing as the burn seared down his throat. Good. He wanted it to hurt. "You don't seem like the whiskey type." A voice, smooth, deep, and edged with danger. Julian turned his head and found himself looking at a man sitting a few stools away. He was not the kind of man Julian was used to. He wore a perfectly tailored black suit, but there was no designer logo, no ostentatious watch. His hair was dark and perfectly styled, but his eyes, they were striking, deep, unreadable, as if he carried secrets that could swallow the world whole. "Maybe I wasn't before," Julian muttered, taking another sip. "But people change." The man tilted his head, studying him. "Rough night." He let out a bitter laugh. "You could say that, for some reason." He found himself talking, the whiskey loosening the pain lodged in his chest. He told him about the engagement, the betrayal, the humiliation. He didn't know why. Maybe because he was a stranger. Maybe because he looked like he wouldn't judge him the way the rest of the world did. The man listened, never interrupting, just watching him with those dark, knowing eyes. And then, when he finished, he leaned forward, resting his elbows on the bar. "If you need a husband," he said, his voice a low, possessive rumble. "I'm right here." Julian blinked. Then he laughed, really laughed. "You," he teased, eyes glimmering with drunken amusement. "You want to marry me?" The man smiled, a slow, dangerous curve of his lips. "Why not? You need a husband. And I want you." It was crazy, completely insane. And yet, something in Julian's chest stirred. Maybe it was the alcohol. Maybe it was the heartbreak. Maybe it was the fact that, for the first time tonight, he felt like he was in control of his own fate. So he lifted his glass in a mock toast and grinned. "All right, stranger. Let's get married." Julian woke up with a pounding headache and an unsettling sense of wrongness. The sheets beneath him were not the silk ones from his penthouse. The air smelled faintly of coffee and something metallic and unfamiliar. And then he saw it, a solid black band on his left hand. His stomach dropped. He turned his head slowly, too scared of what he would find. And there he was, the stranger from the bar, Damien, lying next to him, shirtless, revealing a tapestry of scars across his chest and one arm draped lazily over his waist, his breathing steady. Julian gasped. What the hell had he done? Julian sat on the edge of a sleek leather couch, staring at the bare, gray walls, the dim lighting casting long shadows across the minimalist, almost Spartan apartment. This was his new home. He still wasn't sure how it had come to this. How he had gone from silk sheets and marble floors to this clean but unnervingly empty space with polished concrete floors and a kitchen equipped with little more than a high-end espresso machine. How he had gone from being Julian Davenport, the glamorous fiancé of a wealthy businessman, to Julian, whatever his last name was now. He glanced down at the black ring on his finger, as if expecting it to vanish and take this surreal nightmare with it. But it didn't. Instead, there was movement from the small kitchenette. He turned his head and saw Damien, his husband, the stranger he had agreed to marry in a drunken haze. He was standing by the stove, dressed in nothing but a pair of black sweatpants. His back turned to him as he prepared something. The rich scent of dark roast coffee filled the apartment, making his stomach grumble before he could stop it. Damien glanced over his shoulder, catching him staring. "Morning, husband," he said, a smirk playing on his lips. Julian groaned and covered his face with his hands. "I was hoping this was just a bad dream," he mumbled. Damien chuckled. A low, dark sound. "Nope, it's real. You married a stranger. Congrats." Julian peeked through his fingers. "And you're completely okay with this?" He shrugged, placing 2 cups of black coffee on the small dining table. "I'm a man of my word. You needed a husband." "I delivered." Julian exhaled sharply, shaking his head. "This is insane." Damien slid into the chair across from him, watching him carefully. "Drink first. Then we can talk about how much you regret your choices." He scowled at him but picked up the cup anyway. The reality of his situation hit hard over the next few days. He had nothing. No access to his family's money, no designer clothes, no housekeepers to clean up after him. He had to wash dishes, do laundry, and worst of all, he had to live with the suffocating quiet of Damien's life. This wasn't about budgeting. It was about invisibility. Damien didn't seem poor, just discreet. The first time they went out, Julian had pointed at a fancy restaurant, only for Damien to steer him towards a small, nondescript diner in a back alley. "We don't draw attention, Julian," he had said, his voice soft but firm. "Welcome to the real world." Julian huffed but said nothing. It was humiliating, frustrating, and yet oddly freeing. For the first time, there were no expectations. No pressure to be the perfect socialite. No judgmental eyes watching his every move. And then there was Damien. He wasn't like the men he had known, men who threw money around, who measured worth by wealth. Damien was different. Despite his teasing, he was fiercely protective. When Julian burned their dinner, he just laughed and ordered takeout from a place that delivered in an unmarked car. When he tripped over a loose floorboard, Damien was there to catch him before he could hit the ground, his movements impossibly fast. And one rainy evening when the power went out and Julian sat curled up on the couch, feeling more lost than ever, Damien simply grabbed a blanket, draped it over his shoulders, and sat beside him in silence. He didn't pity him. He just was there. And slowly, very slowly, Julian began to realize maybe he wasn't as lost as he thought. Julian had always prided himself on his ability to read people. Growing up in high society, he had learned to recognize the subtle tells, the way someone carried themselves, the slight hesitation in their voice when they lied. But Damien didn't make sense. At first, he had accepted that he was just a private, quiet guy. But little things didn't add up. It started with the way he moved, with a silent, predatory grace that was unnerving. Then there were the phone calls, always in a language Julian didn't recognize, his voice dropping to a low, commanding tone. One evening, as they walked home, a group of men on the street corner fell silent as they approached, their eyes wide with what looked like fear as they nodded respectfully at Damien. Julian had asked about it, and Damien had just shrugged. They know not to cause trouble. Then there was the car incident. A few days later, as they walked past a luxury car dealership, Julian had joked, "If you could have any car in the world, what would it be?" Damien barely hesitated. "An armored Cadillac Escalade," he said casually. "Ballistic steel plating, bulletproof glass, run-flat tires." Practical. Julian stared at him. Most guys he knew would have picked a flashy sports car. Damien noticed his look and shrugged. "What? I like to be safe." Julian let it slide. But then came the gun. One evening while Damien was in the shower, Julian was looking for a pen in the small wooden drawer of their kitchen table. When he saw it, nestled beneath a stack of crisp $100 bills, his heart stopped. It was a sleek, black handgun. Damien was broke, wasn't he? They lived a life of deliberate obscurity, ate at diners, and avoided attention. So where did this come from? He carefully reached for the weapon, the cold, heavy steel a shock against his fingers. Before he could process it, Damien's voice came from behind him, cold as ice. "Looking for something?" Julian jumped, dropping the gun with a clatter. Damien was leaning against the doorway, a towel slung around his neck, arms crossed. He turned to him, eyes filled with confusion and fear. "Where did this come from?" Damien simply walked over, picked up the gun, checked the safety, and placed it back into the drawer along with the stack of cash, closing it without a word. Julian stared at him. Damien? He finally met his gaze, that same infuriating smirk playing on his lips, though it didn't reach his eyes. Does it matter? He asked. Julian blinked. Of course it matters. We live like we're in hiding, and you have a gun and stacks of cash just lying around. Damien shrugged. I like my privacy. That's not an answer, he chuckled, stepping closer. Didn't you marry me because you wanted a husband? No questions asked? Julian's breath hitched. That is what he had drunkenly agreed to. But now, standing in front of him, knowing there was something dangerous he wasn't being told, he felt a deep, chilling unease. A horrifying thought crept into his mind. Was Damien involved in something illegal? The floor creaked beneath him as he shifted his weight. Damien's head snapped up. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then slowly, Damien closed the drawer, his fingers tightening around the edge, his jaw clenched, his expression unreadable. Julian forced himself to find his voice. Where did that money come from? Why do you have a gun? Damien sighed, pinching the bridge of his nose. It's not what you think, Julian, his chest tightened. Then explain it to me. Damien hesitated, and that second was enough. Are you? Julian swallowed. Are you in some kind of trouble? Damien's gaze darkened. No. Then why are you hiding guns and cash? His voice rose. You act like we're ghosts, but you have thousands of dollars sitting in a drawer. What the hell is going on? Damien exhaled sharply, frustration flickering across his face. Julian, just trust me. Trust you? He scoffed. How can I trust you when you keep secrets like this from me? Damien's eyes flashed. I could ask you the same thing. You married me thinking I was just some nobody, and that was fine, right? But now, the moment you see something you don't understand, you assume the worst. Julian opened his mouth, but Damien cut him off. You think I'm a criminal? He snapped. Julian flinched, guilt washing over him. He hadn't said it outright, but he had implied it. Damien shook his head, his voice quieter now, but laced with something raw. I thought you saw me for who I was, not for what you think I might be. Julian's throat tightened. I do, he whispered. Damien's jaw worked, his hands curling into fists before he turned away. Then act like it, he muttered, walking out of the kitchen and leaving him standing there more confused and terrified than ever. The next day, Julian couldn't shake the feeling that he was missing something big. That afternoon, while sorting through some old books in their apartment, he found a yellowed newspaper clipping tucked between the pages. His pulse sped up. It was an old crime article dated 3 years ago. And right there in the center of the page was a photo of Damien, or at least someone who looked exactly like him, standing behind a notorious crime boss. The name beneath the photo wasn't Damien. It was Damien the Shadow Volkov. His fingers trembled as he read the headline. Volkov family enforcer disappears after rival mob hit. The mystery of the Shadow. Julian's blood ran cold. Who the hell had he married? The farmer's market was alive with color and chatter. The scent of fresh bread, ripe fruit, and roasted coffee beans lingered in the crisp morning air as Julian and Damien moved through the bustling crowd. It had become their little Saturday ritual. Julian had grown to love these mornings. There was something peaceful about them, something real. He reached for a bundle of strawberries when a voice, sharp, mocking, and too familiar, cut through the air behind him. Well, look who it is. Julian froze. Slowly, he turned around, and there, standing in the middle of the market in his expensive tailored suit, was Marcus. And beside him, arm wrapped possessively around his, was Ivan. Julian's stomach twisted. Damien, sensing the shift in him, placed a gentle hand on his lower back. Friends of yours? He asked lightly, though his voice had dropped an octave. Julian exhaled slowly. Something like that. Marcus smirked. I have to say, Julian, I almost didn't recognize you without your designer suits and family fortune. Ivan let out a soft laugh, looking Damien up and down with a sneer. And this must be your husband. His tone dripped with mockery. Damien remained silent, but Julian could feel the way his body tensed slightly beside him. Marcus crossed his arms, clearly enjoying himself. It's actually sad, really. You used to be someone, Julian, and now you're married to a man who can barely afford a decent pair of shoes. Julian's blood boiled. How dare he? Damien had been nothing but kind to him, fiercely protective and loving. And yet Marcus, with his shallow, materialistic arrogance, had the audacity to stand there and mock him. Julian lifted his chin. At least he loves me, he said evenly, his voice steady and proud. Marcus's smirk faltered for a split second before he laughed coldly. Love? Oh, Julian, that's cute. But let's be honest, love doesn't pay the bills. Ivan leaned into him, his red lips curving into a wicked smirk. And let's be honest, what does your husband have other than that old jacket? Julian's fingers curled into a fist, but before he could speak, Damien finally did. I have enough, Damien said smoothly. His voice was calm, unbothered, but his eyes told a different story. Dark, calculating like a predator sizing up its prey. And then he smiled, a small, knowing smile that held no warmth, only threat. And I always take care of what's mine. Marcus frowned slightly, as if for the first time he sensed that something wasn't quite right. The air grew cold. Ivan scoffed, though his bravado seemed to falter. You're delusional, but Damien simply tilted his head, his chilling smile never faltering as he took a small step forward. You should go, he said, his voice a low command. And Julian, standing beside him, watched as Marcus and Ivan, for reasons they couldn't possibly understand, suddenly looked terrified and scrambled away, disappearing into the crowd. The game had just changed in a way they would never see coming. The apartment was quiet except for the soft ticking of the old clock on the wall. Julian sat on the couch, his heart pounding, his hands trembling as he held the newspaper clipping he had found. The name on it burned into his mind. Damien the Shadow Volkov. He knew that name from hushed whispers and sensational headlines. The Volkov crime family was one of the most powerful and feared organizations in the country. But 3 years ago, after a bloody power struggle, Damien Volkov, the family's most lethal enforcer, had disappeared without a trace. And now he was sitting in their tiny apartment, pretending to be just an ordinary man. This wasn't just a secret. This was a lie woven into the fabric of a dangerous world. Damien walked through the front door a few minutes later, casually tossing his keys onto the table. He looked at Julian and smiled like nothing was wrong. But everything was wrong. You're home early, he said, shrugging off his jacket. I was thinking of making pasta tonight. Unless you're craving something else. Julian didn't move. His fingers gripped the clipping so tightly that it crinkled under his touch. Finally, he spoke. Damien the Shadow Volkov. The name hung in the air, heavy, suffocating. Damien's hands froze mid-motion. Slowly, his eyes lifted to Julian's. There was no confusion in them, no shock, just a quiet, grim understanding. Julian swallowed hard. That's your real name, isn't it? Damien exhaled softly and ran a hand through his hair, his face unreadable. Where did you find that? He asked, his voice calm. That's not the point, Damien, he snapped, standing up, his emotions spilling over. The point is, you lied to me. You let me believe you were just some regular guy, when in reality, I'm a monster. He finished for him, a bitter, humorless smile playing on his lips. Julian's heart twisted. This isn't funny, he whispered, his voice breaking. Why? Why didn't you tell me? Damien sighed and leaned against the counter, folding his arms. Because I didn't want you to look at me with fear in your eyes, he said simply. Julian froze. His voice was steady, honest, raw. You think I haven't seen it before? He continued. People who want something from me. People who fear me. I've never had anyone who just saw me. His eyes darkened. I needed to know what it was like to have someone who wasn't part of my world. Someone who was good. Julian's breath hitched. The truth of it cut deep. He had been raised in a world where power meant everything. He had almost married Marcus, a man who had seen him as nothing more than a bargaining chip. Now, standing in front of him was Damien, a man who had walked away from a throne of violence to find something real. And he had chosen him. A tear slipped down his cheek. Damien stepped closer, his voice softer now. "I never meant to hurt you, Julian," he murmured. "But now that you know the truth, I have to ask." He lifted a hand to gently cup his cheek, his thumb brushing away the tear. "Are you afraid of me?" he asked quietly. Julian's heart pounded, because for the first time in his life, safety didn't matter. He did. The rooftop was bathed in the crimson glow of the setting sun, the soft hum of a cello playing in the background. A gentle evening breeze carried the scent of night-blooming jasmine mixing with the warmth of candlelight that flickered on the elegantly set table. Julian stared in awe. The scene before him was breathtaking, too perfect, too unreal. He turned to Damien, who stood beside him, his hands tucked into the pockets of his black suit, watching his reaction with quiet amusement. "You did all this?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Damien smirked. "I have my ways." Julian let out a breathless laugh, shaking his head. "You know, most regular guys don't have access to private rooftops and cellists." Damien chuckled. A deep, rumbling sound. Guilty as charged, he reached for Julian's hand, leading him toward the table, pulling out a chair for him before taking his own seat across from him. The dinner was perfect, but despite the beauty surrounding them, Julian couldn't shake the emotions swirling inside him. A part of him still struggled to bridge the gap between the Damien he had come to love and the dangerous mafia boss he truly was. "You're quiet," Damien observed, watching him closely. Julian sighed, setting down his fork. "I guess I'm still processing everything." Damien nodded as if he understood. "Because of who I am?" Julian hesitated, then nodded. "It's not that I'm scared, Damien," he said. "It's just, this world of yours, the one you walked away from, it's different. What if I can't handle it?" Damien leaned forward, his eyes locking onto his. "You think I care about any of that? Do you think I would ever let anything from that world touch you?" Julian opened his mouth to respond, but Damien suddenly stood up and then he dropped to one knee. Julian's breath caught in his throat. Damien pulled a small velvet box from his pocket and slowly flipped it open, revealing a stunning black diamond ring shimmering under the rooftop lights. His heart pounded. "Julian," he said softly, his voice steady but full of emotion. "I don't want to just be the guy you married in a drunken moment." He took a breath, his eyes never leaving his. "I want to be the man you choose, the man who stands beside you, not because of chance, but because you want me there." Knowing everything, Julian felt tears well up in his eyes. Damien took his hand, his thumb gently stroking his skin. "Forget the name," he murmured. "Forget the past. I'm just Damien. You're Damien." A tear slipped down his cheek, because deep down he had always known he was his. He nodded, his voice breaking. "Yes," he whispered. Damien's face lit up, and in one swift motion, he slid the ring onto his finger before pulling him into his arms. And just like that, he wasn't lost anymore. He had found home. The grand hall of the city's art museum was filled with warm golden light, the sound of a string quartet blending with the hum of conversation. Guests moved elegantly around the room, raising glasses of champagne in celebration of the gallery's new exhibit. But this wasn't just another high society event. This was Damien's public re-entry into the world, not as a shadow, but as a legitimate, powerful businessman, with Julian by his side. It was a declaration. He was no longer in hiding, and Julian was his. Damien stood beside him, his hand resting lightly on the small of his back, his presence a shield as he smiled at the guests. He had never imagined his life would turn out like this, not just stable but powerful. Then, as they greeted the attendees, a familiar voice made Julian freeze. "Well, isn't this a surprise?" He turned, and there they were, Marcus and Ivan. Only they were different now. Gone was Marcus's arrogance, his confidence. His once perfectly tailored suit now looked slightly worn, the usual smirk on his face replaced with a sheen of sweat. And Ivan, who had once draped himself in luxury, stood beside him with a panicked expression, as if the ground beneath him was crumbling. Julian raised an eyebrow. Marcus forced a smile, but there was desperation in his eyes. You've certainly moved up in the world. Ivan scoffed, but it lacked conviction. Enjoy it while it lasts. Julian didn't react. He simply tilted his head. I heard about Ivan's father's company. All those failed investments. Tough luck. Damien, who had remained silent, now finally spoke, his voice calm but firm. Business is unpredictable. One wrong move, and everything crumbles. Ivan's jaw clenched, and Marcus's face paled. They had once looked down on Julian. Now they were the ones ruined, their families on the brink of collapse. Julian squeezed Damien's hand and smiled. You know what? I think I should actually thank you. Marcus, he frowned. For what? For leaving me that night, he said, his voice steady, confident. Because if you hadn't, I wouldn't have found the best thing in my life. He turned to Damien, his heart full. Marcus said nothing. Ivan looked like he was about to be sick. They practically fled, disappearing into the crowd. Julian let out a small laugh, shaking his head. Poetic justice, don't you think? Damien smirked, his eyes dark. I prefer to call it a consequence. The sun cast golden rays over a sprawling villa overlooking the ocean, waves gently lapping at the private shore below. Julian sat on a large terrace, watching as two little figures, both boys, ran across the manicured lawn, laughing as Damien chased after them. Their sons, Adrian and Nicholas. Julian's heart swelled. Once he had lost everything, and now he had a family, a purpose, and a love that had defied all odds. Damien jogged back to him, their children giggling as they clung to his legs. He leaned down, pressing a soft kiss to his forehead. Happy? He murmured. Julian smiled, reaching for his hand. More than I ever thought possible. He looked at his family, at the life they had built, and whispered, You were the best decision I ever made. And so Julian's journey proves that sometimes life's greatest heartbreaks lead us to our most unexpected destinies. He lost everything, his wealth, his status, even his family. But in that loss, he found a fierce, true love, found himself, and built a life more meaningful than he had ever imagined. Damien had never needed a fortune or a boardroom to win his heart. He had only ever needed to be himself. Together, they turned pain into power, creating a legacy of loyalty that would protect their family for generations. And in their dark, dangerous world, that was the greatest treasure of all.